everybody. Welcome to another episode of That's a Fact. I'm your host, Kirsty Adams, and you are about to enter a very spicy episode, the officially 6th edition. I am so in love with this title already, and also in love with the beautiful humans to accompany me in this episode. Shani Hutton from Native Nude Sex Toys, and Loren Loubser, who's an actor, but she is also the podcast of Open Wide Say Ah. I'm going to give these beautiful humans an opportunity to introduce themselves to you. So why don't we move the screen over to Shani Hutton.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here. And it's really been such a powerful journey entering the world and discovering and really liberating the world of sex and sexuality and all that comes from. So I'm looking forward to our session. So I'm Shani, founder of Native Nude, and I'm currently based in South Africa in Port Elizabeth. And I moved back to South Africa last year after traveling for about 6 years, where my mind really kind of opened and saw the world and the liberation, and my mind was really opened in the space of sexuality. And through my own personal journey of being so disconnected to this part of myself is where my liberation really began, and my own reclamation. And through that work, I developed this insane passion and purpose to really share this. It became something that I just felt was like I had to do it. And that's when I launched Native Nude, which is really focused around crystal and glass pleasure ones, around yoni eggs, and also embodiment workshops. So rewilding rituals, really the embodiment of, activating our sexual energy, understanding it, and how we liberate that. So I definitely take sexuality beyond just the scope of sex, and like, how does that liberate personal power? How does that liberate abundance? And money is just as taboo as sex. So when we reclaim pleasure, we also reclaim money. And, it's a sense of like, when we start to own our sexuality, we start to empower partnership and all of life. So it's really like the whole scope. So I really see Native Nude as a reclamation of pleasure and of power. And it's super exciting. It's been beautiful to see this in part of South Africa really taken to it, and it's gone global already. So I'm currently shipping to 18 countries, and it just keeps growing by the day. So it's really beautiful. So thank you so much for having me here.
Hi, thank you for having me, and thank you for having this conversation. And I studied the arts. I am an actor and a performer, and I started working within sexual education in 2014, traveling to schools around the Western Cape and just teaching it around consent and around sexuality and around having safer sex practices and what sex looks like, understanding your anatomy, understanding your menstruation, your cycle, your lack of that, what our bodies look like and how they work. And then I obviously delve into that a lot more myself, looking at my own pleasure and my own sensuality and my own sexuality. And I just started talking more and more about sex, and because people would hear that I was doing workshops with learners, they then wanted workshops with adults. And workshops with adults, you think is a lot different, but a lot of adults knew basically the same amount as teenagers, because there's just such a lack around the conversation around sex and around our bodies and what our bodies like and what pleasure is. And so my work is just kind of focused around pleasure and educating. I then started a podcast last year called Open Wide Say Ah, which is available everywhere. And it is all about educating around sex and what sex looks like to different people, because all of our sex looks different. And I have recently been published in a book called Touch, which is a compilation of a whole bunch of amazing sex stories and sensual stories and sexuality stories and stories around trauma, stories around like just sexiness. And that's been amazing. And so Yeah, I do dabble in sex work, which has been really taboo, but really saved my ass during COVID times. Like when those 3 big payments came in, I did not care where it came from. I was like, well, the arts, which is judging me, is not paying me. And so the sex work is paying me. And so I have had to like break down that taboo for myself because I don't put it out there everywhere, which means the stigma has really kind of affected me. But yeah, I guess like sex is just, it's tied into every part of me and all of my work. And that's me. Yeah.
The question that I want to start with right now is, what age do you think it's important for people to know about sex and to know about their bodies? And let's start with Loren.
I think it's different for most people. I think that at schools we kind of introduce anything around, especially in South Africa, around anything that's sexual and that is around abstaining or around reproduction with humans. It's kind of grade 6, grade 7. That's an age of about 12 to 14. Where most learners have experienced something sexual, whether it's by themselves or whether it's through a traumatic incident or whether it's through just like play with other learners or with even like friends or family members or whatever at like a really young age. We have quite a few learners that have already experimented from a younger age of 11, some learners from an extremely young age of 9. And it is really not spoken about at all. Even when you get to grade 7, it's really not spoken about. And then in high school, it's very much around STIs and around how bad it is and around teenage pregnancy. And so I think that it should be incorporated from grade 1 at an age-appropriate level of what your body is, like where parents are already educating, in bath time, and when children touch themselves, they explain what that is and, what is happening. And so that conversation shouldn't just be like steered away from, because people are scared the more you talk about sex, that means that you're condoning sexual activity. Where if you actually understand and talk about it from a really young age, a child then knows what is their rights and how their body works and what is crossing a boundary and crossing a line. And so we can have age-appropriate understanding and games and learning of anatomy and then that progresses throughout, our education system and throughout like high school, and so that it just breaks a stigma away, but also that a learner has power in knowing when something has happened that shouldn't have happened, and knowing their rights, and knowing, that they're not only reflecting at the age of 25, this incident happened when I was 10 years old, and I'm only learning now what consent is, what grooming looks like, what sexual activity, what all counts into that. And then I'm reflecting and going, now I need to heal traumas that I was never ever aware of. And so I think the younger the better, and some parents might, argue with me, but I'm not saying that we then talk about pleasure and different types of having sex at a really young age, that we talk about age-appropriate ways of learning about your body. As you do when you learn, we have to wash in between our toes and how we wash our hands. We learn how we have to wash our vulvas and how we have to clean our foreskins, And so that it's not just a part of the body that's kind of, don't talk about that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I hear you, girl. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I referred to you as girl. You definitely told me about your identity. But I'll take it all. Oh my gosh, I'm still learning, so I hope you forgive me.
Girl is not gendered. Like,
I know, I spoke to one of my non-binary friends about it.
Yeah,
I spoke to one of my non-binary friends, and she's like, I asked her, can I call you sis? And then she's like, yeah, sure. It's only if you refer to me as an actual woman, then I would be, okay, no, that's not the appropriate gender assignment. But anyway, Yeah, thanks for the forgiveness. Over to Shani. What do you have to say about, at what age people should be learning about their bodies and about sex and sensuality?
I really, really love this question because I think this is why it's so important for adults to embody their sexuality and partners to embody their sexuality, because what I see most in society is that kids aren't learning because the adults can't handle it. The adults are the one that are shamed. The adults are the one that are shy. The adults are the one that like giggle and snicker, and it's like, ooh, when like sex comes up, and that's the precedent that's like set for kids. So it's like a downward spiral almost of like generational trauma and trends, and that's where the liberation really needs to start happening. So I am also a big believer, like the sooner the better. And I think when someone's really embodied in their sexuality, you're able to really kind of intuitively know where a child is. So you can meet them where they're at, right? Because every human is different. So we're going to awaken our sexuality at different times. We're going to discover it at different times. We're going to experience different things. So as an adult, it's really important to be able to connect to that, to explain to a child, this is the time you're learning about your body and calling your body parts what they are. We have eyes and elbows, and then it's like a flower and a cookie, and it's like, no, like teach kids from a young age like what it is. Like we have a vulva, we have a penis. It's like, let's call it what it is, because we just block that part of the body. And then it's no wonder that it's so hard to liberate it, like, 25, 30 years down the line. Sometimes it's 60 years down the line. I'm working with clients on that it's like to overcome that shame of being so disconnected and so not taught. And, you're so shy around your sexuality. So for me, I see the importance of really learning about the body, the right way about the body, the anatomy from a young age. And I see a lot of sexual energy in young kids, and it's very innocent. So when we understand sexuality, we can understand the different scope of it. It's an innocent sexuality. It's a childlike sexuality. It's not there to harm. But when adults can't be around that, it gets really dangerous, because we need to protect the innocence of it. So when we can meet the child there and explain to them the innocence, it's the same thing of like when self-pleasure starts. And a lot of it will happen when kids are 6 or 7, they will start to like rub against couches or teddies, and they'll notice like, this feels really good. And we need to explain to them, like, this does feel good and you're allowed to do that, but that's something, that you do in your own space. And I believe that kids are actually empowered when they know parents are having sex. I remember when I was younger, all I wanted to know was that my parents were having sex, because to me it meant that they had a healthy relationship. And I think it's important to understand that that's something that can happen when you're an adult, and there's choice in that, and understanding, because we silence sex so much. That is why trauma and abuse is silenced so much, because we make it hard to speak up. So it's really hard to speak up. So I think the more we can normalize the topic, and the more someone is really empowered and liberated from a young age, the more they're going to speak up, the more they're going to protect their own sexuality, their own body, and the more they're going to make a choice that they want, right? And there's no right or wrong in the choice. It's a choice for them. So I think that that's really, really what it comes down to. The sooner, the better. And I think as an adult, to really lead the way and show by example. So to be confident in your own body, to be confident in your own sexuality. Kids learn a lot more through seeing than even just the listening, is where children really start to learn. So that would be my take on that question.
Is there one particular myth about sex that bothers you? And how would you bust that myth? And let's start with Shani.
I think the myth for me would just be that there's a right or a wrong. Like sexuality looks really different on everyone. And I think as soon as we get too much in a way of what things need to be, we jump from one kind of place of being held back into another, when we can really come together. Like full liberation is understanding that my liberation might look different to yours, you know, to theirs, and respecting that. So I believe like when everyone can really come into their body at their pace and what feels good for them and explore and all of that, it's you find your own liberation and reclamation of sexuality rather than it having to look a certain way, which is what a lot of society and sexuality is now. You know, like porn can make sexuality look, it has to look a certain way. Like marketing, advertising, the media makes it like look a certain way, and then we taught a very different way. So we taught like the liberated and the sexual, but then we only kind of taught about like STIs, unwanted pregnancy, the fear, like everything that can go fucking wrong with sex. Whereas like, but then we see another thing, right? So it's like, how do we understand the beauty of it, the healing of it, the liberation and the empowerment, and understand that that's going to look really different on everyone. So my myth would be that there's a right or a wrong way to follow it. And yeah, I would love to see that change.
For me, there are two myths that I always like fight. The one being
two myths it is.
Two myths. The one myth being that sex is a penis and a vagina, and that it's about penetration, and that is what sex looks like. You know, sex can be in many different forms, and sex is really not just about anatomy and not around like a heteronormative so-called male and female anatomy being together, and that sex is really for anybody and for all genders and all sexualities and all bodies, and we can actually take genitals like completely out of the conversation and still have sex. And then the other myth is that sex is about an orgasm or a climax, and I have quite like late in my life tried to exclude that, you know, that it's not about chasing a climax or chasing an orgasm. And when one person doesn't get that there's a complete feeling around, you know, like dissatisfaction or a letdown. And for someone else, then, you know, the sexual act is now finished because you've had some sort of climax or some sort of ejaculation. That sex doesn't only finish when there is an ejaculation or there is a climax, and that's not what, you know, like the finish line is and the goal of what sex is. So yeah, I think that if we just took those things away from sex, I think then everyone would start questioning, okay, well, what is sex and what can be sex, and what can sex look like, and what are we doing, and what does that pleasure look like? I think then there would be a lot more play. If we took those two kind of myths and beliefs out of it.
Tell us how your specific sexuality defines the way that you would apply yourself to sex.
The way my sexuality would apply me to sex. There's a complete openness to me, and that I have to then apply a different way or an open way of having sex with different bodies. And when I was younger, I was extremely sexually active, and I had a lot of sex, and my sex looked a certain way. It was very penetrative. It was very based on the men that I was sleeping with, and it was very based around their pleasure. And so I got off, and I got off from pleasing as well. But the more I opened myself up to what my sexuality can look like and the different bodies that I was attracted to, but to also de-center everyone else that I was having sex with, and kind of just do the work on myself to figure out what I liked and what I wanted and what I can ask for, or what I can give myself while having sex. And that it's not just about the ways that someone else is pleasing me, you know, and that I can add toys to that, or I can add another person to that, or I can say, okay, I'll do this for you while I do this for me, or while, you know, like I then had to look at what what brings enjoyment to my sex. And that really was about discovering, firstly, my pleasure and discovering my sex, but also discovering what I'm attracted to and what I like. And so I came out as like queer only last year at the age of 30. And I had been experimenting, but I think I didn't want to allow myself to just say, this is what I need, and this is what I like, and this is what I want, and this is what I want my sex to look like, and what I want my pleasure to look like. And that doesn't mean that it's the same with everyone that I have sex with. And when I have sex on my own, what does that sex look like? You know, do I then just like do the bare minimum to like get myself off, or do I like edge myself out for hours, or play with different toys, or like make it sensual for myself, and light candles and give myself a play date session of really just allowing a complete openness. And I think that has come with just learning about my own sexual pleasure and my own sexuality. And so I've tried to apply that with everyone. You know, sometimes I go in and I'm just like, okay, well, now we're gonna have sex, and I've brought this along and this along and this along, and the person is like, I don't want any of that, and this, I just want this, or I just wanna lay and caress, and to be open to that and go like, okay, well then let's, you know, and kind of just throw all of the things out of the door, and to leave the expectations, and to just play in the present and take away pressure and just like bring pleasure.
I think the word that comes to mind is really unpredictable. I feel that like my sexuality is very unpredictable, and I think it's because I was so disconnected. So I came from a point of being really disconnected to my body and my sexuality. So for me, my sexuality is a lot of freedom. It's really unpredictable. There's a lot of choice in it and a lot of depth. So when I connect sexually, I like to connect with depth. I like to connect with like a lot of like natural ecstasy. I like to bring in a lot of breath, a lot of sound, a lot of movement, a lot of like primal energy. But sometimes I'm very tender, you know, and I just want to be held, and I want it to be more like slow and gentle. So I'm very unpredictable, and a lot of this in all bodies, it can come up in just how we're feeling with our cycle. It could be the person you're with, it could be the energy or the mood or whatever's going on in life. So for me, I feel like really unpredictable is the way that I show up. And I think the more we can normalize that, the better as well, because it takes us out of that performative stage. So it's like, I can be like we have to admit that like sometimes we just want to be ravished, you know, and it's like really good to be fucked. And that's just as beautiful as having this like ceremonial, deep, like intimate moment. So it's both, like all of sexuality is so powerful when it's from a place of choice and liberation. So for me, I think my sense is like unpredictable, and that makes me feel like I'm getting the most out of life, out of my sexuality, out of sex. So yeah.
I'm speaking from an artistic perspective, but do you think that your sex life has influenced your creative life?
Definitely, like 100%. Sexual energy is life force energy, it's creative energy. And that is probably the biggest difference I've seen from coming from a space of being like really sexually disconnected and then sexually liberated. And it's not to say that I'm like the peak of liberation, it's an ongoing journey, right? So I'm very much a part of this liberation and empowerment as well. But creative energy, absolutely. Like if I look in the way that I created Native Nude, like I believe that was a creation, that was a birthing through sexual energy. And if I look at the way that I create, I love to write, you know, and my sexual energy enhances that. So it's this sense of like having like this like energy that comes forward. And that allows us to create. And you know, sexual energy creates connection. Like all of life is creation. And I come very much from a standpoint we create our own reality. So at the moment, I'm busy studying with Layla Martin, which is the studies of neuroscience, sexuality, and tantra. And it's very much based on how sexual energy creates our life. And once someone's rooted at the core essence of that, that's where liberation comes in. And that's where like the full spectrum of life is liberated, because it's our core essence that our sexuality is. So it's almost no surprise that society tries to diminish sexuality, because it weakens the power of a human when it's suppressed. So when we come to this place of liberation, we become powerful, we create more, we show up more, we go for what we want. So for me, absolutely, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I wouldn't be living half the life I'm living without my connection to my sexuality, because it's created so much in my life. So yeah, I absolutely love working with sexual energy to create.
I love what Shani said. You know, there's a sexual energy is our power. It's a currency. It feeds, and it really gives every part of you energy and roots you. And I think that when there are times when I feel like I don't know how to get into this, if I feel really rooted, I know what to create, and I feel more inspired, and that inspiration does definitely come from a sexual energy and from a sexual place. When I studied acting, we always learned like techniques of, you know, dropping into like your sexual energy and into like, you know, we did voice work, and that was very, you know, to breathe and to be rooted and to feel it in like the pit of your vagina. But at the same time, no one ever wanted to really engage with the sexual energies that you had while like being a performer, and especially in theater, like you have bodies kind of moving together and holding weight and loving on each other and creating art. There's a lot of sexual energy in that. And there seems to be a disconnect especially in the Cape Town scene, of what, as an artist, where performance and sex can come together. And so there's been a lot of stigma around, you know, anything that's like hypersexual, that I've had a lot of people tell me, like on productions, that, you know, you don't want to get a reputation for yourself as someone that is extremely, everything is about sex for you. And I was like, well, it's because I am like sexually very positive, and it also is part of my work. I think in doing sex work, I had to say, hey, I'm an actor and an artist, but I also bring sex to it. And the two can definitely go together. You know, like I am not disconnected if I need to do a sex scene or if I need to do performance art. Like I am definitely going to like be as vulnerable as I can be, because there's a truth to it, and it's not just performative. And so I bring that into my sex life, but I bring my sex into my art. And I think you are a better performer when it comes from a truthful place. You're a better actor when you're not just like projecting and performing, that you kind of have that in you. And so we kind of have to like undo this stigma around being a professional, or being so-called less of a professional because I am involved in sex work, or because my work evolves around sex. And so I think that I am at like the height of some of my career points when it is centered around sex. And so people think I'm going to get a bad name for myself, but I've gotten business deals. I've been published. I've gotten, a feature film, like there's things that come out of having a truthful sexual energy and not just having to like hide that. And so I don't want to work with you if you think that sex is bad and that it's a stigma and that I should hide that part of myself. Because I mean, I don't like, I feel like it insinuates something around like sex culture or slut shaming, and that it kind of works against what I do. And so yeah, I'm just like, no, my Instagram will be full of my ass and will be full of like what I do and will be full of like random dildos and things, because I mean, why must I now have like a separate acting page to be taken seriously as an actor? And then you can't see the rest of my personal life. Like, no, I'm a full human being. And so, yeah, I think art and sex can definitely, like, they create together.
That was, wow. I'm blown away by that, honestly. And I think I see Shani being blown away by it. I was literally typing up some quotes that I will be quoting you from, that I'll be quoting you on for the rest of my life. You said something about, no, but you said something about how sex is a truth. It is our truth. And for so many generations, it's been hidden. And to hide a truth is deceiving yourself, it's deceiving humanity. So it's just as it shows in the work that you do and the way that you almost like evangelize about sex wherever you go is just fucking amazing. And it's just the liberation is what people should not be ashamed of, but should be empowered by. And that energy, if it moves everywhere, it will empower others. So
as I was listening to Loren, it like brought up, you know, obviously I'm not involved in the acting scene, but I actually work with international actresses in embodying sexuality for them to empower their career. And I just felt to share like how much that empowers acting, because you can embody deeper emotions. So sex is very primal, it's very raw, it can be very emotional. So when it comes to like human emotions, if you can't embody like full fucking ecstasy and surrender and like you know, like that deep pleasure that sex brings, how do you as an actor or actress really start to embody deep grief? How do you embody like all these different emotions? So I believe when you connect to your sexuality, and I see it in the work that I do with clients, it's this full spectrum of self which will enhance any career. It will enhance any partnership, because you've come home to yourself. So you embody all that you are a lot deeper. So I think if anyone's in the field of acting, I think it's almost a disservice to rule out sexuality, because you're going to limit yourself, whereas you're going to like full on step into that power of your talent and your potential when you embody the full spectrum. And like Loren said, without shaming it and without pretending that it doesn't happen, like it, you know. So I just thought I would add that in.
Are there any other types of creatives that you work with, Shani? Like, for instance, musicians or dancers?
Yeah, at the moment it's a lot more around the acting and a lot of business owners. So I do a lot of, you know, really working with sexual energy to empower business. So creating business in alignment, wealth consciousness, how sexual energy really enhances money, abundance, freedom. So a lot of mine is more around people who are involved in coaching, businesses, a lot of like tantra practitioners, a lot of, like around healing, so more entrepreneurs, and then the I've got some of the actresses overseas, which is really cool.
That's cool.
If you were without sex right now, like up until now, what kind of person do you think you would be?
I think I'd be, you know, if I knew about sex but had never been able to access it or you know, experience it, I would be extremely frustrated. But if I never knew about sex, I wouldn't know, you know, that there's an aspect missing. But I think I would be, just a bit more plain and a bit more seeking of other things. I think I would find sex in different things and in different ways. And Shani has said quite a few times that sex is quite primal, and I think that we are born with these instincts of surviving and instincts of you know, seeking what our body needs and what our body wants and what our body has to, you know, like to get. And I think I would have found ways of finding either pleasure or sex. But if I couldn't get it and I knew that it existed, I would be, I think quite frustrated and quite stuck. And I find that, like, just because a lot of people think because I talk about sex all the time and I educate around sex and I give sexual workshops that I am just like fucking all the time. And my sex drive, it also goes up and down. My libido does change. When I want sex and how I want sex does look different. But sometimes I can tell, like, you're in a mood and you're so like irritated about small things. Like, just go fuck yourself. Like, go play and go do something instead of taking it out on the world, or like, just, like when some people just need like a nap, I feel like I need like a sexual nap, and you can tell it, and you can go like, should we just have sex? Like, I think it would take us out of this, like bickering. And so I think I would sit in a frustrated, irritated place in my career and as a human being and in my partnerships. I think if there was no sex and I couldn't get that and I couldn't give it to myself, I get miserable without sex. Yeah.
Short and sweet truth right there.
What comes up is that I would be surviving, not thriving. And I think sexual liberation is when you life starts to thrive. Like the things around you look different. There's a different energy. It's like, it's beautiful. Like we're here to enjoy it. So for me, and I think that comes from a place of also knowing, like I was deeply disconnected because I was brought up in a society and an environment where sex was really wrong. It was like really shamed. It was like, don't do that. Sex is for the one. So I feared it, but I longed for it. So I like always had this like longing. And I just feel like if I didn't have sex, I would just be longing for more. And I like how Loren like brought it into different aspects as well. Like in partnership, that's something that you share like different to people that you're not in partnership with. So it's like this connection, in business, my sex in it, like it literally elevates my business. I wouldn't be half of where I'm at in Native Nude without my sexual energy. So I think, I probably wouldn't even be doing this. So my life would look totally different. But yeah, the sense of like, I'll be surviving and I'll be getting by, but I would always be longing for something more. And I think knowing that there's something more, and that's what I felt for a lot of my life. I knew that there was a better way, and I was like, surely we're allowed to enjoy this, and surely this gets to like be liberated. Like, why is it so shamed? So I feel there would be this longing. So yeah, I'm fucking grateful that's not reality though. That's just a fiction, thank fuck.
God, I love the relief after everyone, like the relief sigh after everyone expresses themselves about this. I think it's something that we have to ask everyone. I mean, I imagine putting up a poll for FemmRoom about, what kind of person would you be if you didn't have sex up until now? And it would be interesting to have both of you comment on that and share it and just, engage with that as well, which, that brings me to, that just brings me back to like how beautiful it is. And I think we can, talk generally from here, where it's about understanding the beauty of it. And our curiosity is rendered because as children, I think we see everything as, beautiful, because that's how life is portrayed to us from young. Things are lovely and innocent and beautiful. So our curiosity is kind of like spurred on by that idea of everything is interesting and innocent and beautiful. So to discover sex like that is quite liberating, although we do need to understand what the warning signs are about sex and things like that, which is obviously why sex education is needed. And I don't know what you would comment on in terms of like, how would you manage sex? Is sex something that needs to be managed? maybe one of you can comment on something like that. Maybe Loren, what would you say about the management of sex?
I don't actually know if sex needs to be managed. I think education around sex needs to be managed. And if I look at my own life, I have some friends that only had sex for the first time, at the age of like 27. And for some people that might feel late, but for some people that might feel early, because it's dependent on the person. And like I said, you might feel frustrated, but you might also only feel safe and understanding and ready to then awaken that at that particular age, and then to start like living in that truth and experience sex. And for most of my friends, that was their reality. They either had sex only once they got married, or sex, once they had kind of felt like they had lived a bit. And for me, I had sex before I knew what sex was. I was having sexual experiences before I knew what bad or good sexual experiences look like. And so for me, I can say maybe that should have been managed, because I wouldn't have had as many traumatic incidences, and I wouldn't have maybe been in as many dangerous situations, or I also seeked many dangerous situations, and I kind of chased a lot of sexual experiences from a very young age. But I had no education around what sex is and what sex can look like. And I didn't even know where my clit was. I didn't know that, the outside is called a vulva, and that you have big lips and little lips, I didn't know how everything worked. I didn't know that I didn't even have a menstruation at that age yet. And so I didn't understand, what was coming. And even once I had a menstruation, there was so much that wasn't spoken about. Like, so little was spoken about menstruation, so little was spoken about sex and pleasure and sensuality, and what is sensual and what can feel good and what feels bad. And so that needed management. But sex itself, I think that I wish I had a freedom, but a freedom in once I had an understanding, or once I had an education, or once I knew what consent was, and once I knew what sexual pleasure was, and once I was given freedom to go explore yourself and play with yourself and figure out what feels good, and have a safe partner or safe partners that allow you to play with each other and figure out what that looks like. I think that needed management for me. But sex of it all, I don't know if it needs management. I really think that safer sex and education around safer sex needs management. It's mind-boggling that, like people with penises and men, they don't understand necessarily how a vagina works. But what's more mind-boggling is that people with vaginas don't know how it works, and don't understand what their pleasure looks like, or how the anatomy works. And so I also learned a lot from porn, and we learn quite like damaging things from porn. I only saw particular looking vulvas, and everything looked quite like groomed and quite, like no hair and very like neat and tight and tucked. And I was like, and then what happened to mine? Like, what's going on here? And then I also learned positions and what sex can, and squirting and double penetration, and like quite like violent graphic ways of like fisting. And so I learned a lot through porn, and I love porn. I love the sex industry when it's done right, and when it's consensual, and when it's it's not kind of like a trafficked or forced industry. It also is a thriving, beautiful industry that is like has all the money in the world, and is a very successful industry. But it is also damaging in what we learn about ourselves, and what we learn about our bodies, and what we think sex has to look like. And there's often not an inclusion of foreplay or inclusion of pleasure or aftercare, and what aftercare looks like after having sex, and what you need, and you know, yes, we hardly ever see condoms, but safer sex also needs to, like, you know, include conversation before and what you need before and what do you need afterwards. And we like cuddle, and I like distance, like, you know, I want to lay on opposite sides of the bed and just like talk and come back into myself, or like, let's get fully dressed and then we can, you know, like cuddle or talk. Yeah, that type of thing you're not going to learn from home, but it's the only place where it seems like, you know, watch it, no one's talking about it, read a magazine, or like see things quite graphically that no one's going to show you and educate you on. Yeah.
That brings a very interesting perspective of how, even like in movies, there's an unrealistic presentation of sex. I think a lot of us say that. I think the first time I had sex, because I'm also a late bloomer, but I started researching, using my amazing research skills from my postgrad, using that to, you know, find out what the hell I'm doing here. And all of these blogs say something like, don't use movies as your reference. And I find that very interesting, especially, you know, from maybe your actor's perspective about it. But the only time that people will highlight, you know, the use of condoms is when the plot is about a teenager learning how to have sex, like one of the Netflix series, I think it's called Sex Education. There, for instance, you might show the process, but when it comes to the passionate moment and everything, it's almost as if it's impossible to reach that passionate moment with a condom, right? And it's almost like, oh, safe sex is lame. But I mean, maybe Shani, you can answer this. How would you advocate for safe sex, and how would you make it something that is still enjoyable?
Yeah, I love that. And just like following even on from the last question, I think where it really stems from is like empowerment and truth of education. So that's how we're going to make sex manageable, because a lot of education is based just around anatomy, which is how your anatomy works, not even how it's pleasured, or different ways that are like empowering. And it's like, you could try this, you could try this, like, you know, it's more like this is what the body is, you know, this is where you menstruate from. And it's like, how do we make it really fun and exciting and take the fear out of sex? There is so much, like, all of sex education is really fear-based. It's like when we learn how to drive a car, you're not taught about all the accidents that could happen and like every fucking thing that could possibly go wrong when you step into a car, right? You're taught like, this is amazing, you can go on road trips and you can get from A to B, and now you've got freedom and now you've got liberation. It's like all these exciting things. When you go to study, you're like taught all these cool things that can happen, and as soon as it comes to sex, it's like, whoa, like, be careful, there's STDs, there's pregnancy, there's like, it really, I think when we can take the fear out of it, we're going to really liberate it. And I think where it becomes, and tapping into kind of two of the conversations, I'm a really big advocate for self-pleasure, because once someone can really understand their own body, it's you're going to find sex being manageable to you. You're going to find sex being safe to you. So you start to understand, like, cool, my body's ready for penetration or my body's not, right? So then it's like, actually, I just don't want that tonight or today or this morning or whatever. You start to get really comfortable with having conversations because you understand your body. So you get comfortable with safer sex questions. You get comfortable about saying, like, and because you understand it. So a lot of this stems from not understanding it, or like not knowing what we desire or not. So I like used to keep quiet because I didn't know, like I didn't know how to speak, because I was like, I don't really actually know what I like. I don't even know what questions to ask. Like, is it embarrassing to ask like about STDs? And like, so I just kept quiet, and that sent me like down a really dark road of like not being empowered in my body. It was all like pleasure for the other person. Whereas when we have self-pleasure, there's a lot of liberation in self. So I think it's actually beautiful for someone to embark on like this self-pleasure journey whether it's before sex or after having sex, to really find the empowerment, because then that's when you establish your own freedom and sexuality. So that's when you decide what safety means to you, what the conversation looks like, what the liberation looks like. And from there, you will continue to explore it. This is definitely an ongoing journey. Like, our sexuality changes, our desires change, safety changes, like so many different things. I think, and that's why I love sex to be unpredictable, because I'm like this is where we learn, this is where we're alive, this is like the human experience, right? We don't go to sex ed and then now we understood everything. Like, we're still gonna learn new things all the time about sex, and that's the beauty of it, and that's the frame that we need to start taking in society, is the power of it, the freedom of it. Because when we have the power of sexuality, it's more done with reverence, right? And I say reverence in the sense of not having to be this like very spiritual thing, like reverence in the sense of respect, of like respect for your sexuality, respect for mine, respect for theirs. And that comes from understanding a lot of depth of power of what sexuality actually holds.
Wow.
I really like that.
I love that too. And, we kind of have to put a cap on it right now, but it barely scratches the surface as to what we're talking about right now. And I feel another volume of this conversation coming up, because it's so important for us to understand that part about ourselves in order to liberate ourselves. Because I think a lot of the stresses and a lot of anxieties that we have within ourselves is because we haven't, tapped into that part of ourselves as well, So Shani, Loren, it's been an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. We're going to top this episode off with our tradition of stating affirmations, either about yourself, to the audience. What do you think now? It's going to take a little bit. Find your inner sensuality and empower yourself beyond measure. And that's a fact.
You are worthy of pleasure and play, and worthy of changing your mind and figuring out what you like. And that's a fact.
You are liberated in the freedom of your pleasure and your power. And that's a fact.
Oh, yes.